Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Jason Lengstorf, who is the founder of CodeTV, and we go very, very deep into developer tools marketing. Jason knows a ton, and it's great. The first time we interviewed with Jason, it was one of the most popular episodes we've ever done, so really cool to have him back. Here we go.
Your instinct, and it's, it comes from a good place, is every time you get a new piece of information, use that to reinvent the entire strategy, because you want to have the strategy that is the most adapted and the most up to date with what you're hearing from the market. The problem is that what makes it possible for somebody to care about you and your brand is continuity. And so if, it's like if you've got a friend and every time you meet that friend, they've got a brand new hobby and they're like a completely different person, they're hanging out with a new group of people, it's just it's like exhausting. Like, it doesn't mean you like them less, but you don't know what to expect. You don't know when you should call them or like what activities are the right activities to reach out to them about, because they're always into something new, right? And companies are the same. If you're constantly changing your messaging, you're constantly changing your positioning, then every time I'm starting a project, I'm not sure if your company is right for me, because everything that you're doing, it like contradicts itself. You're never consistent enough for me to have a clear picture of how you fit into my workflow. So giving me enough stability in messaging for me to be able to make a decision about how you fit into my life is really important. Because remember, if you run a company, you're spending 24 hours a day thinking about your company.
Yeah.
As a consumer of your company, I spend about 15 seconds thinking about your company if you as a founder are lucky. And that 15 seconds, if it feels inconsistent, I just sort of write you off as not being relevant to what I'm doing because I don't quite understand it. So I'm going to go with the thing that I get, which is why a lot of people choose big, old, ostensibly bad companies, because it's very predictable. I know exactly what I'm getting. Like if you go to Jira, what Jira offers hasn't changed in decades, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure there's lots of new features, but ultimately they've sold exactly the same thing. And so I have a very predictable outcome if I reach for them, even with all the frustrations and all of the stuff that comes with choosing Jira as a tool, compared to the newfangled tool that keeps telling me, well, we're like Jira if you crossed it with Trello. Just kidding. We're like Trello if you crossed it with Linear. Just kidding. We're like Linear if you crossed it with, it's like, well, okay, I don't know what that is. I'm sure it's good. Come back when you've made up your mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Scaling DevTools is sponsored by WorkOS. WorkOS helps you get enterprise ready. That means they give you all the things that you need to start working with enterprises. Things like audit trails, skim provisioning, role-based access control, and single sign-on, so you can get back to shipping a great developer experience. Let's hear from Utpal from Digger.dev, a dev tool using WorkOS.
We haven't had to think about auth at all, and I think I haven't implemented it, but Mo did, and he's not stopped talking about it. He loves it. I think support is great. They have a Slack Connect channel. We have a Slack Connect channel with them, and issues, if any, there haven't been many, but anytime there have been issues, it's been addressed super quickly. So audit trail, SSO, stuff like that, we don't think about that anymore. Genuinely, we don't think about that anymore. It helps specifically for open source companies, because I know there's hackers who say SSO tags and whatnot, right? But in the enterprise, you're not thinking about SSO, you're not thinking about audit trails, you're not thinking about these features as a core part of your product, and you get that out of the box. And you don't necessarily think about these enterprise features, but they still lead to revenue, and it kind of is a no-brainer in that sense. So we have absolutely no complaints, and we are firmly rooted in WorkOS. I'm super happy.
What is the kind of the balance, or like how to equate that with this, especially now where things are changing and everyone's trying to ride the wave and be the company that can, the infrastructure for agents, all these sorts of things that are changing all the time?
I think it's important to remember that the perception of time is very different when you're in it, right? So as a leader at a tech company, 3 months feels like a very long time. Like it feels like a very long time and also no time at all.
Yeah.
As a consumer, my perception of time relative to your company is blips, right? So the thing that's tricky is, as a DevTools leader, we have to think about our product in the span of consumer time, How often is somebody going to be exposed to our product, and how long do they need to get an idea of what it is we do? My current operating theory is that you should commit to at least a quarter, but ideally 6 months. And if you're able to commit to one message for a quarter, what should happen if you're positioned properly is people will start to repeat that message on their own. So if you say we are, we're Uber for cats, if you're consistent with that message for 3 months, then at the end of that, what you should see is that the people who are most active in your community should be repeating that message. And that means that you've been consistent enough that people understand it, they've internalized it, and now they're repeating it to other people to help explain what's going on. If you can give it 6 months, that's better, because then people who aren't like your number one fans are going to also understand that message and internalize it. It's sort of like Geico. I don't know if Geico is a thing in the UK, but in the US, there's this insurance company called Geico.
And they have known it from songs. It's like people
right.
like Kanye West or someone.
Yeah, right. But so in the Geico commercials, they have this gecko that is their spokesperson who, says like a very specific catchphrase and has done so for 25 years, right?
Yeah.
And when you watch like a Budweiser commercial, they have the Clydesdales, and these horses have been the holiday time Budweiser spokespeople for as long as I've been an adult, right? And so you get these sort of big companies, right, that they understand that sure, they can afford to hire a new agency and change up the image and rebrand and do this whole thing all the time. They have the money, but they don't, because they understand that a consistent message has more value than a perfect message. And so I think that's the really important thing that a lot of DevTools companies need to understand, is that if you're a project management tool, telling me exactly what kind of project management tool you are doesn't actually do you any favors. Make it clear that what you do is make it possible for me to make sense of my work, right? Anything else is details. But if you get into those details as part of your marketing, now you have to change your marketing every time you add a new feature. Right. So it's got to be positioned in a way that I understand that you are going to make it easier for me to organize my work. That's a great positioning for a project management tool. And that's really, if you think about it, like that's what Jira is saying, is like, if you have a huge team, we make it possible to make sense and track all of the thousands of things that are happening inside of your enterprise company. And that's why all roads lead to Jira, is because that's the message they send, and that's the message that everybody remembers, and they're stable. So you don't see Jira rebranding or pivoting or telling everybody that they've reinvented everything or now. And like all that stuff is happening internally. I'm sure they're introducing AI features. They're rolling out new stuff all the time. They're, decommissioning old products, all these things that happen at all these other companies. But externally, the message stays exactly the same. And so they appear to be stable and trustworthy in all of these things, despite all of what I'm sure is absolute chaos on the inside of the company, which is exactly like every other company out there that's got absolute chaos. But a lot of DevTools companies, they're small enough that they externalize that chaos by changing what they say all the time.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned there was trust. There's that like classic phrase of like, no one ever got sacked for hiring IBM. And I guess the message on that is that like, if you get some new thing that comes along and it doesn't work out, people are going to blame you. Where if you hire IBM and they cock it up, then you're like, well, it was IBM. What,
we hired the best. What do you expect?
That's not your fault.
Yeah.
Is it related to that kind of?
I think it is related, but I would say that the thing that stands out to me is that when you have consistent messaging, what it projects to me as a consumer is clarity. And what I need, like I'm hiring you to do a job, right? And so when I come to your dev tool and I say, my company has these challenges, I need you to solve this problem. If you're not ultra clear on which problem you're solving for me, I don't know how to hire you, right? And so I can't trust your company to solve the problem if every time I talk to you, you're telling me something a little bit different about how you're going to help me. You're like, oh, we're the everything tool. We're the AI everything tool. We're the crypto everything tool. It's like, okay, hold on. But what problem do you solve?
Yeah.
Why am I bringing you into my company? Because I don't care if it's the AI tool or the crypto tool. What I care about is that my company is trying to get better, and can I trust you to make me better? And so the clarity of messaging gives me confidence, which becomes trust. And so I think the thing that's really challenging is, we assume that if we get the perfect description of what we do, that will instantly sell who we are and what we stand for. But really what we need is we need to build a sense of like, I have seen this company around. They have always seemed to understand what they're doing. They seem sharp, and the people I know respect them. That gives me confidence to give them a try. And then once you get into the system, ideally the product backs up all of those perceptions, and you see like, it does what it says on the tin. I'm getting the results I expected. It's making my life easier. And now I become one of the people who goes out and instills confidence in others by saying, yeah, that's what we use and it's great. Right. So the thing that I've noticed is that a lot of DevTools companies get very, very focused on the minutia of what they do. They start comparing technical specs like, oh, we can do it in, we're 30x faster. We cut, 15 seconds a week off of your times, which leads to a X amount of savings on, human labor every year or whatever. Whatever it is, they always come up with something, and it's very like technically bound, which means that a benchmark from a competitor can prove them wrong. And it also means that when that thing becomes a commodity, like when we were talking about JavaScript frameworks and everybody's talking about being blazing fast, well, eventually all those frameworks switched over to being Vite plugins. Okay, so now everybody has the exact same performance because it's Vite, right? So what's your differentiator? And if your differentiator was how fast you could build, you've now have to reinvent your messaging because the tech shifted. And the same thing is happening with AI. If you were the whatever tool and then AI comes out and allows you to do that thing in a different way, well, you can't market the technology anymore because now the technology has shifted and you're using AI to do that thing. But the same problem is being solved. And if you can clearly articulate what your value is, what is the outcome for the user, then the tech can shift a million times because the outcome stays the same. And, it's like if you were going out to buy a bottle of Coca-Cola and they were telling you about their specific technological methods for getting the beverage made and into a jar, like when they switch from glass to plastic, it's new messaging. When they switch from, whatever sweetener to the other sweetener, it's new messaging. But we don't care. What we care about is that, oh, it's Coca-Cola. That's the brand I know. I know what it tastes like. It's something that I can have on a hot day. And it's like a million things that we're associating with it that they, Coke pays $5 billion a year in advertising. Like they know what they're doing. They're selling a nostalgia. They're selling a belief, right? Like you don't identify Coke as a technological thing. You identify Coke with memories and with like a state of being. Oh, I'm on a hot day on the beach. You know what I really want is a Coca-Cola, right? Yeah. You hear that sound. You think about like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I want. And more tools should be thinking like that. Like, if somebody thinks about our tool, are they just running benchmarks in their head? Because that's a losing game. That's commoditization. That's a race to the bottom. That's, you're basically like, we can do it faster, but then somebody can do some technical innovation and now they do it faster. Well, now you're on the treadmill and you've always got to be having a team of engineers dedicated to going faster.
Yeah.
And eventually you bottom out where like you're doing micro optimizations, like right now people argue about which programming language is the fastest. And the truth of the matter is, if you're a company where that like Rust versus Go is the bottleneck in your company, holy shit, you've got a great company because that is never the problem. It's always something else in the organization that's the bottleneck. It's like so rarely does the specifics of like how fast you can run a loop in your programming language actually determine the outcome of that product.
Yeah. That's so true. So which companies do you think are doing this well?
I mean, I think like, Linear is a good example of getting it right. I think where their marketing, if you look at the way they communicate, doesn't say a lot about specifically what they do. They more tell you what you can do if you use the tool. And I think that's really interesting. Companies that are good at telling stories via video, I think, before they pivoted to their new thing, the Arc browser company was doing such a good job of like positioning Arc as this sort of like anti-browser browser. And they had this in-house video team. I assume they still do, but I don't know what their new product is. I still use Arc. But they were like these launch videos and all this stuff. And they never really talked about the specifics of Arc. They more talked about how it let you get away from some of the things you didn't like about your old browser. And that, you know, and it was kind of building this idea of like, what if you weren't like beholden to the big search engines or, you know, to a FANG company. And so it speaks to your identity a little bit, and it makes you think like, yeah, I'm counterculture. I'm cool. Like I'm on the edge. And that's a really good way to market to people. And I think, you know, we see this go really well for certain companies, and it can backfire. I think like Vercel's an example of it kind of going too far and backfiring, where they were absolutely selling an identity to the point where now like people feel almost like ostracized and like left out because it like reached cultiness. Right. So there is a balance to be struck, but I would say Vercel is a great example of doing it right. And then, you know, deciding that if a little bit is good, then a lot is better, and maybe finding the other side.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting one though, because do you think it's like a mistake, or is it kind of like a natural, like, you know, like even say like Coca-Cola, like, you know, they do an incredible job, but then maybe they get a lot of kind of hate of like, you know, like it's too much, that, you know, you're kind of victim of your success in a sense.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe this could be my hot take, and, you know, I worked at Netlify, so there's a little bit of like, you know, old encounters as direct competitors there. So, you know, take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, but I have gotten very like cult-like impressions, and the challenge that you see with certain communities is if the community seems to be built around ousting people who dissent, that feels bad. And I think that's a line that has sort of been crossed, where it's like you're either all the way in or you're like not a member of this community, right? And I think that like there are companies that I think have done a good job of being a lifestyle without making it like a personality, if that makes sense. And I feel like certain companies, and I would say Vercel is one of these, they kind of require it to be your personality in order to, because otherwise you're like, you know, you're either a hater or you're all in, right? And it's sort of like, oh, but what if you just want to use it? Right?
Yeah.
Like, what if I don't care?
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I do think I'm kind of like, I sometimes use Vercel, sometimes not.
Well, and I think there's a huge amount, and this is where I think why it's so important to get this positioning right, is you can't make the assumption that everybody cares, right? Like you have to remember that at the end of the day, you are selling the equivalent of a toothbrush, right? I assign my identity to my toothbrush. I don't assign my identity to the brand of socks that I wear, and I don't assign my identity to the tools that I use when I do a little home improvement project at home. Yeah. And I don't care about the tools that I use when I build websites. I'm here to build something that solves a problem. And I want to use tools that solve my problems. I don't necessarily want to like argue with people over which to like, and I do think there is something fun about being a professional and talking to other professionals about what the best tools are, right? And we see this in every industry. You know, I had some work done on my studio recently, and the folks doing the work were like arguing over like Milwaukee versus DeWalt tools. And, you know, it's like it happens everywhere. We all have our preferences and what we think the best is. But I think there's a line that gets crossed where we start to make it like who we are. Like my personality is being like a all in on TypeScript person, and everybody who disagrees with me is wrong, and I'm going to fight them on the internet. And it's like, I don't have time for that, right?
Is it partly to do with like whether that's the thing that you kind of make money, like you kind of tie your career to? Like, for instance, I know you've done some work with Sentry, and like if someone's using Sentry, like it's going to be a useful tool, but it's not going to be like suddenly they get paid a lot more money because they know how to, because it's like you kind of, I don't know, actually.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
Next.js or something is like.
No, I see what you mean. I think I think it's a little bit of the like wisdom and experience curve where early on, it seems like, you're trying to solve a problem and the people who are doing more are using tools you haven't heard of, or they have access to tools that you're not familiar with, or they can, they're employing frameworks or libraries that you've never seen, and they're solving these problems really fast. And so the instinct is to say, if I had those tools, I could do that thing. And this happens everywhere. Like when I first got into video, my instinct was get the nicer camera because then I'll be better at video.
Yeah.
Right. And get the better microphone because then I'll sound better and I'll be better at making podcasts or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that happens across the board. But then as you get more experience and you get more, you become more skilled, you start to realize that like better tools help you do a better job, but you still you can do a great job with no tools. And so a really experienced web developer will sit down with no build tool, no framework, and they'll write you a vanilla HTML, JavaScript, and CSS website that looks and feels great. Like, could they have done it faster? Could they have found some efficiencies and done some other things if they had added in a framework or whatever? Of course. And usually in a professional context, they would. But they're capable of doing without.
Yeah.
And I think where it's hard is sometimes people get caught in the middle where they think my tools will make me good. And then they get really resistant to the idea that the tools don't matter because they kind of build their identity around. Yeah, they invested a lot in choosing a tool that they considered the thing that made them valuable or professional. And so I think the trick when you are a dev tool is like you want a strong community that's like a big supporter. However, there's, I think, things you can choose to support and choose to encourage that lead people to see themselves as like peers in a professional network or as fans of a like lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think the lifestyle thing is kind of fun. It really is. Like, when you look at stuff like Supreme as a clothing brand or what was going on with Balenciaga when they were doing their super weird fashion stuff of like, people doing, dumpster fashion shows and just weird. It's interesting. Like it's really cool to be in the inner cool kid circle. But as a dev tool, like that's fashion and it's always fashion. If you pick a tool and you make that tool your lifestyle, I promise you, it will not last more than a few years, at which point the fashion will change. And so if you as a non-affiliated individual are staking your whole personality around a tool, you're going to have to reinvent yourself every 18 to 36 months because the fashion will continue to change. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. Like, and a lot of folks who are professional creators, that's literally their job is they just sort of like find the things that are trendy and they teach them. And that, like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it can be really exhausting if that's not your job, right? And so as a DevTools company, you can get a lot of hype and like build a really fervent community if you go the lifestyle way. But the risk is that as soon as it becomes unfashionable, now everybody turns on you, right? And so this was, I think, the fate of Gatsby. Was Gatsby had everybody and the community was there. It was super strong. Everybody was building everything with Gatsby. And when it started to become like, well, there's a lot of really good competitors to Gatsby in the space and they weren't investing in their community the way that they were, it was almost like the founders were surprised that people didn't just stay loyal. It's like, well, no, you like the reason you got a community in the first place is because you had something that was uniquely good. You were solving problems in a way that couldn't be solved elsewhere. Now, lots of tools have emerged that solve that problem in the same way. You don't have like a monopoly on this space and you have no reason to expect any community loyalty. You need to be investing in making your tool something that continues to solve these people's problems in a way that is better than anything else that's out there. And had they invested in it as a utility, I think they would have made different choices because I think the investment was made from like the lifestyle standpoint where they figured people would want to go all Gatsby all the time. So the investment was made in Gatsby Cloud where all of your Gatsby sites, which was clearly all of them, would be built on the Gatsby build system, which would, solve all of your Gatsby problems. And there was no way to really run anything else on it in a way that was really supported. And as a result, when people like it stopped being fashionable, they were like, well, that's a lot of work to like have this for my Gatsby sites and everything else over here. So I'm just going to go over here, but it's kind of a pain to host Gatsby. So what if I just stop using Gatsby? Right? And so it just drops off a cliff in terms of usage.
So is it like they should have just been thinking about what's the problem that we're solving? Oh, and by the way, right now, like Gatsby is the way, like we're making this easier, but.
I mean, I think the way to go about it, and you know, I talk about Astro a lot as being like a good example of getting this right. And we'll see what happens because Astro is venture funded and there's a lot of places for them to take a turn in a direction that maybe isn't what I'm talking about. But so far, what we've seen from Astro is that they have invested heavily in help devs solve problems in the way that they need them to be solved in a way that is not locked into any platform. Like Astro deploys everywhere. It uses any framework you want to use or no framework at all. It defaults to things that are very performant. You can push it to a server hosted environment and run it on a node instance, like in a Docker container. You can push it to something like Netlify, Vercel, Cloudflare, run it in a serverless environment. It's just kind of built to go wherever you want it to go. And it solves problems in a way that's very standards based. It allows you to bring your previous knowledge and experience in. So the outcome for us as developers is I didn't have to learn that much and I got a great outcome when I used Astro. And I never feel like I'm like fighting the framework. It's stuff that I remember from, you know, even in my like pre-React days when I was putting stuff on the internet, like those skills still apply. I'm not throwing everything out to learn some new framework specific thing that I would have to throw out if I ever stop using that framework. I'm using the web. And then the Astro things that come in are conveniences that I can also solve in other ways. And so the thing that I find really fascinating about that approach is that my loyalty to Astro is that they're not asking me to make it my identity, right? I get to use it, and mostly what I'm doing is just writing web standards. And so to me, I reach for Astro not because I want to be like an Astro guy, and I want, you know, everybody to know how much I love Astro, but because it's the thing that causes me the least amount of like struggle to get the outcome that I'm after. And I feel like this is one of those things that like, this is why WordPress took over. At the time, WordPress was the easiest way to get the outcome you wanted, regardless of your level of skill at building for the web. And because they nailed that, and because nobody else really moved into that space very fast, they were able to get 50% of the web or something built on WordPress, which is now finally declining because lots of different options have come out and WordPress didn't understand that. And they thought they could, you know, like force people to love WordPress, which is why we're seeing the antics. But, you know, now that there's lots and lots of options, people are making those choices for the thing that's actually solving their problem. And so I think this is to me, kind of the core of the challenge is like, you need to be building something that people want, but you can't expect them to want it forever. You have to continually be, you know, remind them, these are the problems you're trying to solve, and be aware of the problems they're trying to solve, and make sure that what you're building continues to solve them, and never expect that what you're going to get is somebody saying like, oh, well, I'm loyal to you because I've always been loyal to you. Like, you'll get a very, very small number of people who will do that, but the vast majority of people, it's their job to put something on the internet. And if you don't make that easy, they're going to find the thing that makes it easy.
It's building making it solve their problem, and then talking about that you solved their problem.
Yeah, I think the thing that's most relevant to most DevTools companies is that what we want to talk about, because we're in the weeds, is the specific, interesting technical problems that we're solving. And we want to imagine that, you know, everybody in the world is going to think of themselves in, you know, like we want that like CrossFit style adherence where everybody's talking about like, oh yeah, I'm a CrossFit person. Like, you know, it's like a whole personality.
Yeah.
But the danger of that is that, one, it's exceedingly rare. Like, how often has anything become enough of a trend that it can become a personality, right? So shooting for that in and of itself is just, it's a moonshot.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that how many of those trends last beyond a season, right? And if you're trying to build a sustainable business, relying on virality and people picking this up as like a thing they want to be a core of who they are is so short-sighted.
Yeah.
And so our job needs to be, we need to be constantly present, but we need to be present in the way that, like grocery stores are present. Like I am here to help you get the thing that you need done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you are a DevTools company, your job is to make sure that you're in the community, supporting the community, reminding them that you are there as a way for them to get better outcomes with less work. And anything else that you do is icing on the cake. But if any of it moves away from that, then you start to get into these places where you're, setting yourself up for short-term marketing. Like, again, if you're talking about your specific features, if you're marketing on like the specific technology, if your whole personality is AI right now, that's not going to last, right? Because either AI is going to become such a commodity that everybody will use it, like React. Like you couldn't go out there and say, well, we're the project management system built in React. Like what? That's a nothing feature, right? And in not that long saying we're the company that uses React or AI, it's already kind of a nothing feature. Every single company now, when you log in, has a little sparkle button, right?
Yeah.
And they all work with varying degrees of usefulness, but like they all have them.
Yeah.
So saying we're the company with AI it's a meaningless marketing term that's going to become increasingly more meaningless as every company now has some form of AI baked into it. So what do you actually solve, right? If your entire premise is we give you AI, I'm sorry, your company's not going to make it, right? Like you're offering something that every single company can offer very easily by paying OpenAI or Anthropic money.
Yep.
So what are you actually solving? And if you don't have that figured out, that's the work that there is to be done. Because if what you're selling is your features, if what you're selling are your specific specs, you can't focus on that. And your customers don't care.
Yeah.
Like I am not concerned about how many gigaflops of processing power you have. It's never mattered to me in my entire life.
Yeah.
What I'm concerned about is that, if I'm picking up your tool, I'm going to get the thing done in 2 hours instead of 4.
Yes.
But you need to be clear on what that thing is that you do. And you also need to be clear that it's not for everything. Like if you tell me we're going to make you a 10x developer and I say, how? And you say, we just make you better. It's like, okay, you're full of shit, right? Like what do you actually do? And when you see somebody who can articulate this really well, then you start thinking to yourself, oh yeah, that actually will make me more effective. I think like warp.dev right now has a really interesting product where it's a terminal, which we all live in the terminal as developers. Yeah. And when you use it, the things that they're offering are like, this is a terminal that you can click in your command and highlight to edit something without having to like hit the back key a bunch of times. You can right click any block of output and copy it instead of having to like drag and paste the whole thing. That is a materially valuable thing as a developer. When I spend so much time running Git commands, starting, doing the npm start and I get an error and I need to send that error to somebody, instead of having to like drag around my thing, I just right click and like send this. Yeah. Right? That's it's so small, but it's so valuable, right? Yeah. And articulating that clearly makes it so that a bunch of developers can go, oh, that is better than what I do now. And now they'll use the tool, right? And I think this was like Cursor as well, was like, oh, you know how like when you use AI to code, it's a pain because you have to like copy paste stuff and you don't get this diff and everything. They were like, we just built it into the IDE so you get a diff. And what I saw move everybody to Cursor was we will generate a diff, right? Now that's a feature. That's a feature. But what they were selling was this outcome of like, you want to integrate AI into your workflow in a way that doesn't turn you into a miserable code reviewer or a copy paster. Yeah. Right. It like we want a productive way of integrating code of AI into our coding workflow. And that's what Cursor sold. Right. And they got great adoption for that. And obviously everybody is like scrambling to build the same thing. And we're seeing stuff like Windsurf. And I think, VS Code has all those features now. And so it's very much like an arms race at this point. But ultimately, they all understood the assignment, which is to say what we're doing is we're not removing you as a developer. We're not saying AI is going to replace you. We're giving you the tools to integrate this into your workflow so that you can be more effective and get better stuff built faster, right? That's the positioning. And they're all making tons of money doing this, right?
Yeah. I feel like this is a really key distinction between, like, it's almost like there's almost like a subtle difference of like what you're saying there about like, you could say being able to right click and send is like a feature. But the way that you're describing it is that it's not a feature isolated as a feature. It's like solving a problem for you.
Yeah, like the problem of a terminal has run the same way for years and years and years. And there's no mouse input. There's, it's all like key-based stuff. And so actually interacting with a terminal outside of knowing a bunch of shortcuts is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
So this adds a layer of UX on top of the terminal that allows you to do common terminal things much faster. They've got a bunch of other stuff that I'm not talking about that is great. But in my mind, like where I kind of had my aha moment on Warp was when I saw somebody like copy pasted something from a website into the Warp terminal. And it was like, start with in quotes, your key here, and then over here, your key here. And they pasted it in, and then they double clicked that your key here and pasted in their key. And I was like, oh, because that's a pain when you're not in there, right? You're like, okay, like paste it, hit back, and then you got to delete the thing and then paste the thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, this is a modern terminal. This is a terminal that lets me do my work, that it will acknowledge that a mouse exists.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not too proud to use a mouse, so like, let me.
Yeah,
Why can't my terminal recognize that these modern input devices exist? And the all of the things that terminal is doing is, it's like, you as a developer spend a significant amount of time in the terminal. We are adding a modern UX to this so that you can do things that feel like they should be possible.
Yeah.
You want to use your mouse? Fine. You want to have snippets? Fine. You want to share this with your colleagues so that you all have the same like git rebase like super command that's compressed down to like update, right? Like all of that stuff is just, it's just there. You don't have to share a bash config. You don't have to keep like somebody's bash files all like, or you're not sharing a dot files thing. Nobody's putting their .env into the Slack chat anymore. It's all like all these things that we do at our jobs. They thought about, and they were like, how would we make that easier for a team, or how would we make that easier for an individual developer if we didn't want them to have to stop using the terminal, right? That's a clear outcome. And it's a clear value prop to me as a developer, because I like using the terminal. I don't want to move out of the terminal, but there are things about it that are hard. So if your outcome is you get to stay in the terminal, but it's not as hard, that's a clear value, and now I'm interested, right? And every feature they add supports that value prop. They would have to completely pivot as a company to not be able to keep pushing that particular message for the whole life of the company, right? And so that means they can have to take the longest walk around to what we were initially talking about. They can come up with a marketing campaign that is, we make it easier to get stuff done in the terminal, right? And then whatever that messaging is, right? They take that, they can put together assets, they can put together landing pages, videos, talks, demos, whatever it is. And that can all live for a really long time. And the only thing that really needs to get updated is like, if there's a demo, obviously you add the new features to the demo, but talking to a developer about how the terminal is essential, but kind of hard. And wouldn't it be great if your terminal didn't do all that? And like gave you a modern input? Okay, that's true. Even it's true now. It'll be true when you add 5 features in the future, and you don't have to rewrite that marketing. So a lot of it is, if you understand what the value is that you provide, the features will always support that value prop. Like React, the value prop is, what if you could write your UIs in a way that was component based and reactive? Every single feature that, hooks and RSCs and all this stuff, it all is new and it's interesting, but it supports that same value prop. So the underlying outcomes that React provides have stayed true. And so you can still talk about it in the same terms, and you get the same benefits. And then you can get into the minutia of like specific features and specifically how it solves those problems. But that's more of like, as an expert, we want to figure out how things work under the hood. But as like a CTO, I don't have to care about that. I can just say, well, I know component based seems to be what's won in UI. So React is the most popular component-based framework. Let's use that, right? Cool, easy. That solves a lot of problems for me and my team. So good job, everybody. Let's rock.
Yeah. I do like one more question just on.
I feel like you got like
amazing.
one question
that was
and I
amazing.
just didn't stop talking.
That was so good. So I just want to do one. So I know before the interview, I was like, should we talk about video? And you were like, well, because for those that don't know, Jason is an expert at video, amazing at video. And I was like, should we talk about video? And you were like, well, I feel like the DevTools founders would actually prefer to talk about like the higher level up. And then video is always kind of like down. Like, once you've got those things at the top right.
Yeah.
But just for fun, could we do just ask you a few things about like, if any DevTools founders decide that they do want to do video, or I guess when they should, and then,
I mean, I think at a base level, video is probably the highest leverage thing you can make. Just because if you, for example, do an interview like this, right? You can then take that interview, cut it into shorts. You can take the audio, drop it as a podcast. You can take the transcript and edit it into a blog post. You can turn that into a tweet thread. You can, there's so many things that you can do with video. And the same is true when you are talking about like a dev tool. If you do a launch video, you can run it as a promoted ad. You can take little cut downs and promote those on Reddit or LinkedIn or Google Ads, whatever you want to do, right? So you can kind of turn it into part of your paid strategy. You can, if you like, I do the Web Dev Challenge, which is a show that's 30 minutes long, and it's kind of like functionally, it's kind of like a webinar. It's devs using a tool to solve a problem, and so you get to see the tool in action and
cool.
all of that. And the outcome though is we have the show itself, which is an asset. We have the apps that get built out of it. So that's another asset. You've got the relationship that gets built between the devs who were on the show and the tool that sponsored the show. So they can go on and say like, hey, do you want to turn your app into a tutorial, which is another video plus blog plus snippet asset. We've got all the social clips that we can then run for weeks, honestly, after the episode goes live to keep reminding people like, hey, did you want to see how this works? Look at this fun thing that happened. Go watch this episode. And each one of those things is like a new thing we can sell. It's not us remembering like, oh yeah, we got to go talk about that thing that we did. It's like a new thing. It's a new asset. Oh, look at this funny moment, right? That's easy to share.
Yeah.
And it points back at the video that you did before. So you're getting more leverage out of that thing. Blog posts, you get user feedback, like so much stuff happens. People leave comments. You can use those comments to inspire new blog posts, new videos, new anything. And it just works in a way that like very few other mediums work. And so from a standpoint of like, if I'm working at a DevTools company, and this was honestly how I got to where I am now, is I was at Netlify and I just saw we were doing conferences, sponsoring event booths, and we were seeing ROI, but it just wasn't the way that it was in 2018. We were doing like paid ad spend, but it was on like, we were bidding on keywords and it just wasn't getting the results that we wanted. We were trying to do meetups, but like post 2020 meetups just kind of disappeared. Like they're very difficult to get people to come out to. Companies aren't really hosting them anymore. Like it just, the infrastructure that was there is gone. So like running a local meetup is kind of off the table unless you want to do it yourself. Right. Yeah. So that kind of disappeared as an option. It's like, what can we do? Like, what are and everybody was on Zoom calls all the time. Every conference looked like a Zoom call. Every webinar was basically a Zoom call. Your meetings were all Zoom calls. Your family talks were all Zoom calls. Nobody wanted to watch another Zoom call. Yeah. So what could we make that was actually interesting? And the only real option was, well, you can do in-person stuff, but that gets egregiously expensive because you have to get people to come out. You've got to have enough space for them. You've got to, there's a lot of production stuff that needs to happen for people to be able to watch a thing that's happening live with enough detail for them to follow what's going on, unless it's a talk. And so, I mean, that's like, okay, so TV is kind of the next option. We watch a lot of TV. And before, during, and after the pandemic, we all have watched a ton of TV. So what lessons can we borrow as DevTools companies. Like, why do people choose to watch something?
Yeah.
And it's because it's showing people that they're interested in doing, they have actual stories, they're doing tasks that are relevant to my interests, and there's some kind of emotional stake. Like, I want to see if they can pull this thing off. So as a DevTools company, you need to make webinars, you need to make demos, you need to tell customer stories, you need to reach out to these audiences. Well, so that's already going to cost you money. So just invest a little bit extra and make something that people want to watch, right? And so, you can work with a company like mine, or you can think internally about, like, what would our reality show look like? What would our series look like? What would we make? And how would we take the problem that we solve, the outcomes that we generate for somebody? What can we do that's a story that basically the arc is give people the problem that we solve and then watch them work through it, right? And maybe you do David versus Goliath, where you've got like somebody with no tools is trying to solve this problem, and you get to watch all the struggles they hit, all the rough edges and tough corners, and somebody else gets your tool and you get to watch them just sort of breeze through it, right? That's a great comparison. And that's an interesting story too. Like, can a super seasoned developer outperform with no tools, outperform a junior with the right tools? Like, I think the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. And that makes for great TV. I'm so invested in watching that. If I get to see, like, can somebody who's been through a boot camp with Cursor outperform a principal engineer using Notepad? I want to see the outcome of that, because I think I know, but I don't know if I'm right. Right? And so I think those are things that would be really fascinating to watch. And it's the same demo that you're trying to give. Watch how much more productive I am if I use this tool. Okay, fine. That webinar is you're going to prove a point, but I'm not going to choose to watch it. I will absolutely choose to watch you racing somebody else to solve a problem with two different sets of tools. Right. So it's just, I think we just need to be a little more creative and a little more thoughtful about, like, why would somebody donate their attention to us?
100%. 100%. I think everyone should go watch CodeTV and see what you're doing, because, like, for the content, but also for DevTools, for ideas, because it is different. And I think that's what's incredible, is that it's that production plus different. It's great. And like, I think the really important thing is, like, obviously come work with me. I want to work with all of you. But but I think the trick is it's focusing on the story. Because I think what happens is a lot of companies, when they start thinking about marketing, they're thinking immediately about, like, SQLs. And so they're not willing to entertain the idea that the story will allow somebody to imagine a world where they don't have the problem that they currently have. And then in a week or 2 weeks, or the next time they start that project, they're going to go, wait a minute, I saw something about this. I think I could do better. Now, the attribution on that sucks. You are going to have a really hard time proving that this video led to this person to activate. But if what you do, if you think about that and you say, you know what, that's the wrong call. We're not going to do that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to put up an email form so that our sales team can call these people. You're never going to convert that way, because you never sparked the curiosity. You never let somebody imagine what they could be. You just said, give me your email. And every time somebody says, give me your email, and they haven't told me why, my instinct is to give them a fake email. Right? So it has to be like, we have to invest in the community if we want the community to invest in us. And people can smell it when you're actively invested in, like, giving them something of value. And there's a million ways to do it. It doesn't have to be video, but it needs to be an understanding that there is an earnest exchange of, like, we're here to help. So we're going to put time and energy and money and effort into making something that is valuable to the community, whether that is good storytelling, which is what I'm trying to do at CodeTV, whether that is something like what Netlify did with the Jamstack community, where they were, like, just dumping buckets of money into keeping local meetups running, right? They basically ran a whole nonprofit around making the Jamstack community function. And, and there was a point where they decided strategically to stop doing that. And you can kind of draw a line between where that stopped and when they stopped showing up in news, right? Because they stopped making the investment, and the community said, oh, well, they're not investing in us, right?
And so the thing that's really hard is it's very, very difficult to fit that intangibleness of like, we are here to support and grow this community because we know that if we are making the community's life easier, they will choose us when they want to go and solve problems that are relevant to the domain that we help in. You can't put that on a spreadsheet. Like, okay, we went and spent, I don't know, $500,000 a year on generating a reality TV show about the devs who work in the problem space that we have.
Yeah.
You will see the return on that. And like, if you've got a company that's got an enterprise sales pipeline and your ACV for a single enterprise customer is $250,000, it doesn't take long to recoup your investment, you know?
Yeah.
But you're not going to get direct attribution where that SQL came from the show, because it's going to be somebody watched it who then went to work and like used it a little bit and then showed their manager, and their manager's like, you know what, we should look into this for the company. And then they make a sale. There's like 5 hops in that chain, 0 chance attribution's happening.
Yeah.
But you know it's true. You know it works because you can see when we are doing this, the lines are deviating from the norm, right? Even if they're not attributed, you know that it's like, it is being driven because the community, you can just feel it. Like if you've got any sense of connection with your community, you know that it's working because the vibe is there. Like you can sense in the way people talk about you, the way people reach out, that like they feel like you're one of them. Like we're all in this together. We're part of this community, as opposed to you are a company attempting to sell me a good.
Yeah. True. Jason, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this was great. I apologize for, I think you got to say 6 words this whole podcast.
That was great. That's the best. Those are the best ones. Those are the best ones.